So thanks for joining us in today's discussion about platform engineering and how it can be implemented at scaling organizations. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Apollo. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the technical strategy channel. We may also have some time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them towards the end if we have some time. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is George Cantaras, and I'm a Director of Engineering at MongoDB, working with our teams that empower platform engineering teams to build managed database experiences. I'm joined by some awesome engineering leaders on the panel today who are ready to share their experiences and insights. So let's get started with some intros of our panelists. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks, George. Hey, everyone. Good to see everyone. I'm a long-time developer, platform builder as well. I've led teams that built platforms from Cloud Foundry to Heroku, Mesos, Kubernetes, of course, late, and now working with Syntasso, building out Kratix for managing platforms. Super excited to join this panel of amazing people, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. Next up is Smriti.
Hey everybody, Smriti Patel, VP of Engineering and Security at Apollo GraphQL. And before this, I was at Stripe and VMware. I've basically been building platforms for the last 20 plus years and love bringing the lessons I've learned and the experience I've built to shipping Apollo GraphOS for our users. Basically, it's everything you need to build an API platform for the modern stack. And super grateful and privileged to be part of this panel here and excited for the discussion we're going to have.
Great, thank you, Shmuti. Next up is Dilip.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity, firstly. So, yeah, I'm really proud to be here, and I'm really happy to be with everyone here. I am a VP of Engineering for &Digital, and &Digital are a professional skills company who are looking to shorten the digital skills gap. Myself, I'm very passionate about aligning people and tech. So that's been my journey, and I'll pass back.
Good, thank you, Dilip. And our fourth panelist is Fran.
Thanks, George. Hi, everyone. I'm Fran Hinkelmann. I'm a director at Microsoft in developer relations. I lead the advocacy teams for security, infrastructure, clean software, and co-pilots. I'm joining from North Carolina, and I'm super excited to chat with this awesome panel about platform engineering.
Thank you, Fran. So really excited to be joining this panel, joining us from all over the world. So during this panel, we aim to address common challenges faced by scaling organizations looking to adopt platform engineering practices. We'll initially explore how you can get started in platform engineering, getting buy-in, planning the road ahead. We'll then discuss challenges of building and operating platforms. And finally, we'll dive a bit deeper into the human aspects of platform engineering. And since we have a packed agenda of great questions, let's dive right in. I would like to start with Smriti. So we hear platform engineering a lot. It's definitely a hype term nowadays. How can we make sure that we're getting started for the right reasons and we're aligning our goals of our platform goals with our overall business strategy?
That's a great question. And I think before you start any great journey, you need to start somewhere. And so I'll start with a small story. I joined Stripe to lead the cost efficiency team and optimize our cloud cost spend. And the thesis that our team came up with was we were spending a lot because teams didn't have visibility into their costs. And so we ended up building a cost observability platform. Now, no surprises there. 4 to 6 months down, Stripe didn't magically become cost efficient. And in fact, I was recently reading how even Gartner predicts that 80% of enterprises are going to have platform teams by 2026. So the mission of all these platform teams is not to just build a platform, because building a platform is not going to magically drive impact. And so the value we need to create has to be anchored on a business outcome. And so the question for us is, how do we do that? And what I learned along this journey is starting with the why. Why should my platform exist? What does success look like? what are the key business KPIs? And this I found was true whether we were building an internal platform or a platform for external users. Because when you're building a platform, it basically takes time, it takes effort, investment, and has a huge opportunity cost for the business. And so it all begins by starting with identifying that durable North Star. And then we switched from cloud cost observability to cloud cost efficiency anchored on a business outcomes. It came about asking what was the leverage we wanted to drive? What problems were we looking to solve? And when you're thinking about a platform, it has to be able to give you a leg up. And so in our case, we didn't want all engineering teams to do the work to make Stripe, say, 5% efficient. But we did need some select 2-3 teams to drive almost 60 to 70% of our efficiency targets. And so our platform had to basically help identify those key points of leverage for the whole organization. And so the guiding principles for me here are the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, which is reduce complexity, whether it is abstracting away domain, tech, or skill set related complexity, reusing policies for standardization based on whatever business needs you might have, and then recycling code and primitives, where users can mix and match these different Lego blocks. And lastly, coverage. Platforms should be wide, ideally just a bit wider than they are taller, so that you're not solving for these niche one-off use cases through point solutions. And in that, I've seen platform team is then that quintessential, 10x team. And so core foundation of a successful platform strategy then comes to architecture. An architecture that's opinionated, it's cohesive, and it's coherent. And that's what you're building out through Apollo's Graph OS, where it helps these platform teams provide a federated supergraph architecture, which is both unifying access, but also providing this decentralized way for teams to independently ship code. So basically, that's what I've learned, which is when you're starting with building platforms, start with identifying the why, set a lofty North Star, and get super opinionated about the leverage and coverage by picking that right architecture with a purpose. And that purpose basically is ideal if it's anchored on the value and accelerating the business outcomes for your organization.
Thank you very much, Smriti, for the answer. And we already have a great question on how to measure the impact of platforms, but I will leave Mark waiting a bit for about 3 questions where we are going to address platform KPIs. And I will go to Dilip. So Dilip, you've worked on building teams from scratch, and kind of that requires new investment, executive buy-in. So how can we get about getting this buy-in and convincing leadership teams of the value of platform engineering? How can we build this business case?
Really good question, George. Thanks for that. Smriti touched on this actually. So for me personally, it's really understanding that why, but at the same time, it's understanding your senior stakeholders. So what matters to them essentially, read the room in that the way that it's sold and the way that it's convinced, that won't be copied from company to company. You need to tailor that approach. You need to understand the medium that you're in, and you need to understand what matters to your stakeholders. So the first thing that I'd say is really, really important is understand your stakeholders, build that relationship, align the people processes to the technology. Some of the things that have mattered to senior stakeholders that I've worked with in the past as sort of a blueprint to start with is firstly understanding those strategic goals. How can you align on that long-term success? And what matters? How can this make a difference to that? The other big one that always comes to mind is the cost. What are the cost savings? Why does this matter? Does this mean reduced maintenance? Does it also mean shared services? I think they're key things to me. If I was a senior member, they're the things that I'd really think of. At the same time, what's the business impact? How can I be more competitive compared to my peers out there? How can I increase the scalability? So I think look at key areas. Another area that I'd say is efficiency. How can I improve the time to market? How can I decrease my risk, especially around security? Because to C-suite members, security is massive. You only have to get one thing wrong and you can be in the papers, essentially. And you've really ruined your profile of your company. Another aspect that really worked well for me in the past was case studies. What has worked for other companies? what worked in my journey to give me credibility that we could go down this journey path. So I think I've listed quite a few areas there, but it may be that certain ones are more relevant to your stakeholders. So work out that journey and sell it in that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Dilip. And I find it, it's very important to kind of understand the why, get this buy-in, and then there is another huge obstacle you have to overcome, which is deciding what to build and how to build it. And we have a lot of discussions. We have this vast landscape in cloud native tools, and we talk about frameworks, we talk about Dora metrics, we talk about all of those things. And we often forget the people aspect of platform engineering. We forget the cultural shift that has to come with it. So Fran, how can we approach this? How can we empower this mindset shift that needs to happen as we get started?
That's a great question, because platform engineering is not just the tools and systems. It's really this product-based mindset shift that goes along with it. And we're trying to improve every team's security, compliance, the cost, the time to ship business value. And with platform engineering, we really want to get there by improving developer experiences. We want to basically blaze the paved path so that the developers just fall into the pit of success. Like, we want the right thing to be the obvious and the only thing that folks can do. So it's important that all the standards are built into the workflows, and we're basically providing self-services, but with guide rails that are easy to consume and compliant by design. So it really requires a community across the company to help drive the tooling and the culture and the process learning. We need an open culture where feedback is welcomed and listened to, because there's no point in somebody building something that they think is the right thing without hearing what the pain points are and without hearing why something doesn't work. So it's really about communication, openness, and then people seeing that they do have a better developer experience with the new tools. So it's an automatic decision to have that mindset shift. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of for the last question of the getting started part of platform engineering, I will go to Daniel. And I usually, when I see someone who has extensive experience with Mesos and Marathon and that stuff, the stack, I can relate a lot. So you've been involved through this whole journey from Mesos to, a lot of us shifted to the cloud, then to Heroku in the first passes we saw back then, and now we have Kubernetes and the whole CNCF ecosystem. How can we make sure that we're not choosing a tool just because it's popular today? And we're not over-engineering our platform, which is, I think, one of the big risks.
Yeah, 100%, George. And in full disclosure, I have definitely over-engineered one or two platforms in my past life, right? I'm sure we all have on this call. So I'm like saying, do what I say, not what I do, is my advice here, right? Or maybe I've learned the hard way. But I think a lot of it does come back to exactly what everyone said here, focusing on the goals of the company, the North Star, jobs to be done, constraints, pain points, it's all sort of pointing in the same direction. And I think the biggest goal as a technical leader is understanding kind of where you are in the org and mapping accordingly. And what I mean by that is when you're in the C-suite, generally they're broad goals, right? But when you're actually building the thing, I was like hands-on, building out scripts with Marathon, with Kubernetes, whatever, you want your leadership above you to be able to articulate the broad picture, the direction, the goals, the pains, but be able to empathize with what you're going through. And I saw some bad examples of that. It's like, we want to go faster. And I'm like, how do I map that to Kubernetes? Do you know what I mean? Whereas I've had amazing technical leaders who are like, hey, we need to optimize our CI/CD pipeline given these constraints and these goals. Go and do some research, and then what do you recommend? And we'll literally do matrices of like, these are our kind of scoring criteria, these are our tools we're looking at, and we'll try and be as unbiased as possible looking, mapping, oh, Mesos scores a 10 in flexibility, but a 0 or a 1 being harsh in terms of usability. Like Mesos is always a bit harder to get sort of started compared to, say, Heroku, but then you can try and pull out some of that subjectivity and actually focus on, hey, I'm choosing this bit of kit, this technology for these reasons. And you need to think about things clearly, meeting the goals, but integrating in your current tech stack is always important, right? Meeting folks where they're at in terms of like your customers of the platform. You want to be thinking about things like usability, debuggability, all these things as well. But I definitely think that sort of the core message I'd like folks to take away as a practitioner and sort of leader as well is recognize if you're that middle manager, you've really got to work hard to listen to what's coming sort of, I'll say from above, but you know what I mean, right? It's not always the right way to say it, but what's coming down from leadership, and then map it into a technical framework. Don't just say, go faster, reduce risk, increase efficiency, because those are great goals, but we need some technical framework around this to help the engineers actually make those choices that are going to be in for like day 1, day 2, and day 2000, right?
Yeah, and a follow-up on that, since you kind of are talking about kind of the different tools to build a platform, Paul posed the question of how do you define a platform? How would you define a platform? Daniel.
For me, just I mean, there's a bunch of great definitions, and I'm going to mangle the quotes. The CNCF Platform Working Group has got some amazing definitions of this. But for me, it's all about self-service APIs that you can manage the life cycle of your platform as a product. So we're not just talking about being able to spin things up, we're talking about managing them over the long haul as well. But for me, big focus is on self-service for developers. Always got to remember the customers of our platform here, and that's generally how I define it. But I do always hat tip to the CNCF for real good definitions, but they often lean on things like API-driven self-service, the ability to compose the platform, for example. No one monolithic platform, I think, is key for me.
Thank you, Daniel. And as I promised, I'm coming back to the kind of the platform impact. And generally, when we're talking about enabling teams, platform teams, trying to use a bit of a terminology from team topologies, it's kind of harder for us to measure the success of those teams. It's kind of harder for us to try and find the KPIs where we can measure the impact of a platform team. So Fran, how can we measure the platform success? What are the key KPIs and metrics that are important for a platform engineering team?
Yeah. I'm so glad by the definition Daniel just gave, because really, to me as well, it's all about self-service and scalability, like having it through the life cycle, self-service, compliant by design. And yeah, good question. How do we measure that? There's many different KPIs, and some might be more important to your org at specific times than others. But you definitely want to look at code velocity. So the mean time to remediate for bugs and incidents. You want to get some NSAT scores, so net satisfaction scores for the critical dev workflows. You want to monitor how long it takes, how many manual steps it takes for common workflows. Like if you see that number increase, that's like, something we could work on. You want to measure pipeline throughput. So what's the time to build? What's the time to test? What's the time to deploy? What's the time to improve anything? Like, it doesn't help if you can build super quickly, but you can never add a new feature. And also a very important one is to look at your failed and flaky automation. Like, it's great to have tests. It's not so great to always worry, well, is this one flaky or did I break it? And then spend 2 hours just hunting down that, oh yes, this is known to be flaky, but I don't see it because it's really flaky. So I just wasted 2 hours here. So that's on the coding side. And then, of course, you need to monitor the life side health. So if something breaks, what's the time it takes to detect any failures, communicate them, and ultimately mitigate them? What's the customer impact of any incidents, and how often are you out of SLAs for your customers? So I think those are the main KPIs. Well, maybe the main KPI is really the employee health, but I think we get to that in a little while. But another thing you want to measure is Are your engineers happy? Are they like, if all those numbers are great, are they also happy being this productive? So we'll talk about that in a little while.
Yep. And we've already heard self-service a couple of times, and we talk about developer happiness, developer experience. So on the one hand, we kind of talk about self-service, autonomy, empowering our engineering teams. On the other hand, we talk about building paved roads or golden paths that promote standards. So Smuti, how do you strike a balance between those two, providing kind of developers with the flexibility they need while also maintaining governance and security standards for the platform?
John, I love the question because it feels like an oxymoron at times, doesn't it? So what I've learned is the way to thread this needle. It keeps going back to the North Star. Like, why does the platform exist? How do we leverage our platform to empower our developers to ship these feature-rich digital experiences with high velocity in a rapidly changing world of tech, right? Take like the latest wave of Gen AI, for example. And so what I've learned is when we're anchoring on driving velocity for our users, you automatically then see how you've got autonomy and agility on one hand and agency and accountability on the other. And so for me, developer efficiency and governance then become, two sides of the same coin. And the big thing about striking the balance then comes down to being this laser focused and obsessive about, like Fran said, the integrated developer experience. How do we bring a product mindset to building the platform? And this requires knowing your user really, really well, knowing what pain points they are having, knowing how we plan to solve that pain. And that's where I've learned that, hey, when you're thinking about making your users awesome at what they are trying to accomplish, like there's this really good example which talks about that when you're trying to capture that perfect moment of your loved one, you aren't really focused on the zoom factor or the aperture setting of your lens, right? So focus on don't focus on making a better camera, make your user a better photographer. And so I use that analogy time and time again, which is using the platform has to feel like wielding a Swiss knife, right? Where you have different tools in your toolkit and you have the right tool for the right needs, for the right situation. And it shouldn't really feel like eating a mushroom, I like to joke, where you eat the right one, you get high, you eat the wrong one, you could die, you use it just right, a lot of flavor in your food. But the point is, a platform is meant to abstract away complexity. So what is the garden paved paths? What are the guardrails baked into the platform? Fran talked about it, where it has to be easy to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong. And you want to find those users. You want to help those users get into those pits of success versus valleys of doom where they are getting lost. And here where I learned is, while you're providing abstractions and hiding away the complexity, you also at the same time want to have something called progressive disclosure, where it doesn't feel like everything everywhere all at once, right? Think about layers. Your platforms are for developers. There's always going to be some curious developer who wants to peel the onion, look under the surface. And so they need to have the right knobs and whistles at the right times. So basically, just to summarize, when you're building platforms and you're thinking about this, don't just raise the floor, but lower the ceiling for adoption and getting that early time to value. So you have that delightful user experience as well. And that's what we're seeing through our users, right? From Netflix to Wayfair, NYT to Cox. We see that our users are solving big problems, digital transformation, personalization, M&A. And we take that pretty seriously at Apollo. So this right balance of autonomy, agility with agency and accountability requires partnering with engineering leaders like the ones here. And it requires being laser focused on developer experience. And that's what we're bringing through GraphOS as well, which is helping platform engineering teams build their platforms with a focus on velocity. Shipping with high velocity, but shipping safely with the right foundations is that core balance.
Thank you, Smuti. And on this topic, kind of on continuing on the quick win side, platform engineering efforts are usually quite large scale and require a lot of time to achieve our end goal, or even start working as this platform as product approach, where we kind of have this longer term vision and stuff. So Daniel, in our previous chat, you mentioned about we talked a bit about the fear of constraints, and how we can use different frameworks to identify our first goals and the quick wins. What are your thoughts there? What are the tools that we have?
Yeah, great call out, George. I definitely recommend like Alio Goldratt's The Goal and the sort of more modern variant, Jim Kim and crew doing the Phoenix Project. They are just great kind of stories. As a consultant, I used to sometimes rock in with those books and just say, hey, theory of constraints, very digestible way. But I think we all recognize, sort of as system thinkers, as many engineers are, that you want to look on the sort of the weakest link on the chain. And sometimes it's really obvious. Like as a consultant, I get parachuted in and looking at the platform and, oh, we're struggling to test the app, or we're struggling to spin up infrastructure on demand. And they were kind of obvious problems, right? But more often than not, I did want to chat to a lot of the platform users. And that is just that product mindset again, right? Really understand your users. Shruti, you mentioned it. I think we pretty much all mentioned it, but do the interviews and frameworks like jobs to be done. I'm sure it's not the only mention of that one today, but the job to be done, as in, what are you really trying to do here? And ask developers, run me through a day in the life. And often if you sort of like a few tricks you can use in terms of like, imagine we're filming a movie, where were you, what were you doing at that point? And you can often uncover hidden kind of challenges. They're like, actually, I kind of wait 20 minutes for tests and sometimes they're flaky and actually, oh yeah, didn't think about that. Do you know what I mean? But you really got to dive in. If the problems aren't obvious, or even if they are sometimes, dive in, really get to those like constraints, because the classic sort of teachings say to us, if you're not dealing with that biggest bottleneck, really your time's kind of wasted, right? You're optimizing some part of the system that's like not actually a blocker. It's tempting to do that. I'm sure I've done it in my career, in all fairness. The easy thing looks like the quick win, but you really got to dive in terms of like, what's the biggest blocker for us having that idea to sort of shipping that observable business value, right? The developer experience is in the middle. Where's the biggest blocker? Where's the weakest link? But jobs to be done, product mindset, the 5 whys, things like that. Why do you do that? Why is that problem? Why? These are all kind of great leadership tools in general, but I definitely apply them to platforms and to understanding where our biggest challenge is.
Yeah, and I think they're even more useful for platforms, because we have engineers on the one hand are the consumers, and on the engineers on the other side are the developers of the platform, and there is this friction of kind of, I think I know the solution that you need better than you kind of know what it is, so that causes friction sometimes. And we talked a bit about quick wins and how to get started and so on, but platforms are usually designed or intended to scale. So Dilip, what are some guidelines we can use in order to build a scalable self-service platform? What are some approaches we can use?
Thanks, George. Really interesting question. And I think for me, I'll start with some of the things that have mattered to me the most. So one that's normally missed, but one that people say, let's leave to the end, that I'd say is super important, is your documentation. And it's the fact of how you're going to document what you're doing, but also how you're going to support it. So that's something that I definitely put at the top of the list for myself. At the same time, it's having that mentality of a feedback loop and continuously thinking about improvement. Because I think far too often, you'd think about actually doing this, but you're not thinking about how can I improve it? And then that becomes technical debt. Technical debt builds up over time. And then you've got a monster, essentially. Key aspects that you've all mentioned already, so I won't go into those in too much detail, are things like making sure there's API driven, having your monitoring and alerting there, thinking about self-healing. I think that's key for me, rather than working in a mentality that you've got an incident and your incident process actually is now taken over, so you're not adding new product features. For me personally, thinking about self-healing is very, very key. It's been mentioned before. I think you mentioned it before, Fran, but automation. Think about ways that you can automate processes so that there's less manual intervention, less human error, and think about that automation in terms of scalability. So for me personally, I've made mistakes, like you mentioned, in the past, taking the approach that maybe I prioritize things in the wrong approach. But for me personally, having that documentation, and I keep coming back to it, because for me personally, if people are off, if people are on holiday, people are off sick, having that handover and making sure that anybody can support the system is very, very key. And handing off that build process for me gives you more chance of success.
Dilip,
Smriti, do you
I love
wanna?
what you said about prioritizing documentation. It's something I've personally struggled a lot. I'd love for any tips and tricks you might have on how do you evolve and continuously improve and ensure that the documentation doesn't lag behind. Anything you found useful, greatly appreciated.
I think for me personally, it's always been start small and start as basic as possible. Because I think far too often, the mistakes that I've made personally in the past was I've tried to make the documentation be this gold standard, be overarching super, but I actually didn't take people on the journey with me. So my advice generally has been start with the most basic form, take people on that journey piece, and get the team to sort of contribute in the form of sort of a community. Everybody makes a bit of time a week. Let's update together, but let's make sure that everybody understands it. Let's comment, let's question. But it's always been very short form and slow, which can be seen as counterintuitive at a senior level. But essentially, when everybody is on the same page and you're aligning your ducks in a row, is the analogy that I always use. That's far more powerful, right?
Dilip, I really like the aspect of kind of collaborating together when it comes to platform documentation and to make it scalable. And we do have a really good question of shared ownership, and we will jump into that topic a bit deeper in one of our next questions onto kind of building this community around the platform, which is quite an interesting one, I think. Before we leave the technical stuff, we do have an interesting question about scale from our audience. Smriti, I would like to address this to you. Kind of what's the experience using serverless technologies at scale, and especially addressing issues with hidden performance metrics. Kind of, we have less visibility when we're talking about serverless. So how can we address those kind of challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with serverless, both when I built out data infrastructure at Stripe and at Apollo, we've had a hit and a miss. I think it depends a lot. My lessons and takeaways from using serverless was it depends a lot on what the workload needs are and the trade-offs you're looking to have between the burstiness, latency, performance, and throughput characteristics, and also the little bit of the cost efficiency and what you have as cost profile for the overall workload. And in that, depending on how much we'll talk about it, I know, but when we think about the chargeback model and attribution, where does serverless actually help or hurt depends a lot on both the business policies that you have, but also the technical needs of the workloads. And so I know it sounds like a cop-out, but it depends is the short answer, and happy to go into detail to learn more about the workload characteristics and where the person's seeing scale issues, and happy to take it on Slack as well for a deeper dive. I think the second part of the question was also around the diagnostics and the debuggability of the entire stack, given the nature of serverless itself. We built out a lot around distributed tracing and to be able to double click into where the things were going slow. And again, it depends on what your entire tech stack and the hot path looks like to be able to double click into where serverless was helping or hurting. So if anyone wants a double click, happy to hop onto Slack and learn more about the situation and the specific scale challenges they've seen.
Thank you. Yes, Shinu, you asked this question. I think this is a good question to join us at the Technical Strategy channel after the panel ends. Now, kind of going to the human aspect of platform engineering. We've talked a lot about developer experience. We've talked a lot about self-service and autonomy and empowering. But we do live in the era of shifting everything left. We see that we want to shift observability left. We want to shift security left. And this is kind of becoming a source of cognitive load for development teams. So Fran, how do you see platform engineering impacting employee health and well-being in these types of settings?
So I would argue that if done right, it reduces the cognitive load. But of course, the big question is the doing it right part here. I highly recommend to monitor any employee concerns. That can be open office hours, anonymous surveys to gather whether the changes you're doing are really beneficial or actually introducing even more friction. I'd monitor for burnout, track vacation times, just making sure everything goes in the right direction. And all of that really requires that culture of community and trust and growth mindset. You can't say, oh, everybody trust me now and answer all my questions because I want it to be great. Like, you really have to work on it and build the right processes on that. So that feedback truly is welcome and actually listened to. Yeah, and
Okay.
of course, any kind of change is always scary. So as with other changes, you have to manage through that and really listen to the fears that people are having and take those serious and approach the change appropriately.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another kind of big discussion topic is platform governance. So how can we actually hold the teams accountable on the correct usage of the platform, kind of service quotas, chargeback models, and so on. So Smoothie, what would you kind of a few pointers on platform governance? Okay.
Yeah, George, I think when anyone hears governance, they automatically think of it as a bad word. I think, but for me, the beauty of platform engineering and why I find it very magical is it's not just a technical problem to solve, right? Like a few of us here have said it. It's about the systems of systems, the human and the social engineering aspect of it. And engineers are smart, rational humans who love systems. They aren't intentionally trying to break the platform. They're just trying to ship their code, which their users need. So when I think about governance, I think about developer efficiency at scale. It's both for the platform teams who are trying to empower vast swaths of their engineering orgs and the engineers who are using the platforms. And so what I found as a platform operator is there's a spectrum. You can't be a gatekeeper or a bottleneck because everybody just hates you and is going to eventually stop using your platform. And on the other end of the spectrum, you also can't be like a free-for-all buffet consultant posture because you then end up with a tragedy of the commons and eventually all suffer because of it. So you got to strike the balance, and learned about it quite a hard way, quite a few lessons when we had this async homegrown platform. And what we found was the users of our platform have obligations from their users. And so when your users are committing to using your platform, they're committing to you. They're taking a leap of faith on you, your decisions, your intentions. And in many ways, it's like you've got power over them. And with great power comes great responsibility. So baking trust, empathy, and accountability has to be a key function within the platform itself. This involves enforcing invariants like 100% ownership, for example, or you can't use more than X or Y compute and memory. Some of this forces the owner to think through optimization upfront versus the platform falling over after the fact. And another thing that I've learned is how do you operate the platform as a service, build that chargeback and accounting models into the platform. So you can not only attribute the costs, but you are incentivizing the right level of ownership, responsibility, and discipline. And lastly, preventing abuse or misuse of the system itself. So build platforms for sustainability, having that trust and accountability baked into the very platform itself. And this is what we're building out of Apollo GraphOS as well. It comes with all the bells and whistles needed to operate the federated supergraph with the governance that is suited to your engineering organizations, from checks and proposals for invariance to rate limiting for chargeback to DDoS to prevent abuse. Think of it as governance in a box, which is catered to driving developer efficiency for both platform teams and their users. And that's then the beautiful balance. You've got efficiency and you've got governance at scale.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. And kind of going to the question we had earlier in by our audience. So we have a question about patterns of shared ownership. And I know, Daniel, we shared some common opinions on how you should build a community around the platform, and the role of inner source models to do so. Do you want to share a bit more on how you can use inner source for platform engineering?
Yeah, sure thing, Georgia. We're seeing this a lot with Kratix, the open source product I'm working on at the moment, like designed to sort of build composable internal developer platforms. And a lot of folks are leaning into the inner source model. I think we've all touched on it a little bit, but sort of getting that buy-in, because there's nothing better than actually have the people contributing code, like the developers saying, hey, this doesn't quite work for me, but like rather than just complain, actually I can do a pull request to make a change, right? And then I take ownership of that, and then even better, like sort of cascades around. But just taking a step back, as in I learned a lot from the PayPal team probably 10 or so years ago now, in fairness. I've forgotten names, but some amazing talks on the conference circuit I was going to. And there is still innersourcecommons.org available. So I encourage folks, if they're interested in how inner source works, check that website out. I think I was initially sponsored by the PayPal team, but now it's sort of very much a common ownership thing. And it really takes the principles of open source into an internal environment, hence the inner source. But what I found really powerful is it gives sort of frameworks and guidelines for things like accepting contributions. And I've got a hat tip, a gent called John Moore, Comcast, and now at Stripe, actually. I'm sure many of us on the call, yeah, we know John. He's awesome. I learned a lot from John over the years. And he did this amazing talk, I think, at one of the QCons, InfoQ thing. And he talked about using RFCs, requests for comments, for having 800 architects in the guild he was running at Comcast at the time, all contributing. Same deal with platforms, right? You're probably going to have hundreds of people potentially as stakeholders in your platform, and they can all just jump in a Slack channel and shout stuff at you. No one wins on that one. So taking that RFC approach, John just walked through how they'd done it at Comcast, and I was like, boom, that's a great takeaway from this inner source, open source approach of providing guidance for getting folks to contribute, getting them bought in, but with a framework, not just a free-for-all kind of thing. So definitely seeing a lot of success at the moment. Folks are sort of rekindling their interest in inner source. I thoroughly encourage folks to do some searching on the interwebs, and you'll find a bunch of stuff, but in particular the Comcast folks and the PayPal folks really did blaze a trail on that stuff.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I think kind of inner sourcing is one of those things we are going to keep on hearing more and more, especially when it comes to the cultural shift that we see with platform engineering. And one kind of cultural shift we see a lot is in terms of migrating, in terms of having a learning culture where we have to learn new systems, we have to kind of move from legacy systems to new ones. And a good way to do it is we kind of end up at a place where we consistently go down a build versus buy road. So Dilip, where do we kind of draw the line, and how should we approach our build versus buy strategy, especially when we do have legacy systems in place?
So I think firstly, it's important to see what that skill set internally looks like in terms of, do we have the skill set if we're looking to actually build? Do we actually have the money, and do we have the stakeholder buy-in to do so? For instance, when you're looking at the skills, it's making sure that people can be upskilled. They can share that knowledge within the team, and we have the time to do so. They have the cloud native skills, and they understand the skills that they need to do this particular task. So it's quite a difficult one without knowing the particular scenario, without knowing sort of the business the sort of business realm. It's hard to say to someone, you should either build or buy. But I think there's some conditions that you'd look into that would actually drive you down a particular road. So I don't want to say you're better to build or you're better to buy. It kind of depends on the situation, and I've done both in the past. But what I would say is, if you do either of those without doing that discovery piece and actually understanding the why, understanding the constraints that you've got, like the funding or the skill set, you'll fail in either avenue. So I definitely say do that pre-work and then work out which avenue works best for your company. And that would give you more of a chance of success.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And kind of tying this with a question we have from the audience, how does that relate with a startup that is now just starting? It's a small team, different needs. Probably you care about saving more money or having faster time to market, but then as you grow, your needs change. So how do you use and choose different tools depending on the maturity of your project?
So I think personally, and I think the other panel members will have a different side to this also, so they'll be able to add. But personally, when I was working for a startup, it was very much about showing value very quickly. So from an MVP perspective, if we could build that MVP super fast and show the value, and that then would mean more investment to build more, we definitely went down the build route in that instance. Where a tool was off the shelf and we could integrate that quickly, and we could showcase our skill set that we could integrate fast, and we had the skill set to do it, we went down that angle. So initially with our startup, we did go down the sort of buy route, and that was a logical decision. But then there came a decision in the scaling journey where we became larger that we had to actually show our technical prowess. And then we did make a conscious decision to sort of build more.
Thank you, Dilip. And with that, although we do have a lot of great questions, I would like to take the discussion to Slack. This has been truly insightful. I'm confident that there are plenty of good stuff in this session that all of us can take back to the office. And kind of off the top of my head, I'm kind of thinking about kind of starting with why. That was, I think, one of the very important messages all of you agree upon. Like, make sure that we know why we're doing what we're doing. Reading the room, making sure that we communicate the message based on the needs of the people that we are talking about. But also, I like Daniel's approach on defining platforms. Make sure you follow the CNCF work groups on platforms. There's a white paper that has come out that's really useful, talks about platform capabilities, platform interfaces. There's a lot of stuff to get out of that. But also, building a product mindset, building empathy, trust, accountability, soft skills are much more important for platform engineering than what we usually make them to be. So thank you very much for all of these great insights in today's panel. We'll all be heading over now to the Lead Dev Slack in the technical strategy channel. Head there to continue the discussion. After the session, you will also receive a follow-up email. You're going to find a sign-up link for the book, the Platform Engineering Playbook. I'm the author. It's being published by Pact, and I hope you enjoy that as well. Thanks for joining me, and hope to see you next time.